superior and non-superior Danehills, and then looked at the whole pedigree, and for each ancestor then said how many times does it occur in total, how many times in the bad ones, how many times in the good ones, what's the ratio, and that kind of weighted it. So, you had the positivity or negativity of each ancestor, and to what degree, and that actually was pretty successful. They picked out a couple of Danehill yearlings that were graded stakes winners from the Australian sales on that basis. And so for key ancestor, we kind of flipped that, and we made the mare have Danehills. So we took all the mares we could that were somewhat closely related. And as I mentioned, that Ian Tapp, who's now at Gainesway, he did a lot of work on this too. It wasn't just Byron and myself. But we took all the mares that were at least somewhat related to a degree to the subject mare, and we weighted it by how closely they were related, and did a kind of very, very similar ancestor score, and then weighted that for how far back they were in the pedigree for each instance. And we've had some good horses that came up from matings that were done using the key ancestor report.
Great. So if you could for a moment just talk about the evolution of the data. I know I'm a web technologist myself, and things started out as just maybe mainframe data or just text data.
Now
we have OData and Web API and JSON, all different flavors of it, and and you can shove a lot of data over the internet very quickly and have it processed very quickly. And, you can even spit OData directly out of SQL Server nowadays. Can you tell me about how that's influenced?
No, I'm not on the technical side of computing, but mm-hmm. I know, I work in terms of, what's possible. I mean, I know that, as I say, I had the idea for TrueNicks 40 years ago, and I now know what we've done for TrueNicks is so far behind what we could do. But yes, I mean, the data's moved so fast. I mean, I did a talk about 5 or 6 years ago when we first started talking about genetics and breeding, that, my grandparents went from when there was no such thing as an airplane, nobody would have known what an airplane was when they were children, to seeing man land on the moon. And what's happened in the breeding industry, it's that kind of, I guess, quantum paradigm shift, as they say. We had was sometimes writing out pedigrees by hand. It moved from that to probably about 25 years ago. Les Brinsfield came up with the first system you could actually look at a pedigree and build hypothetical pedigrees on a computer where you had a special monitor. Then I wrote what was one of the first, or designed along with a computer programmer, one of the first ever programs where you could start looking at pedigrees and showing inbreeding and searching for key ancestors, searching for horses bred the same way and things like that, probably around 20 years ago. And of course now, it's moved so fast that some of the things that were daydreams are probably coming possible. I mean, I remember probably about 25 years ago reading about artificial intelligence and how Johns Hopkins had actually started analyzing strands of DNA, and where protein sequences were thought to have been random, they found patterns. And that kind of hit something in me, and I'd looked at ways of doing it. Again, what I didn't realize was just how difficult it is to train neural networks, deep learning, artificial intelligence. And Byron, who you talked to last week, has gone away and studied this to a great extent. But we're actually starting to look now at the concept of a TrueNicks 2.0, where you would actually start using deep learning. One of the things with thoroughbreds is that you have so many different factors. You have, and nothing looks at this really much in combination at the moment. Class is a tremendous factor for outcome. I mean, if you gave me a $10,000 stallion, say an established $10,000 stallion in the New York program or something like that, and brood mares worth an average of $25,000, and I did my best possible matings, I could pick from, say, 200 mares and we're going to breed 50, and somebody else takes Tappet and breeds 50 random graded stakes winning mares to Tappet, that person will beat me however well I think I'm doing the mating. So class is a factor. But what you have is okay, how do I weight class? How do I weight the pattern? How do I weight the nick? How do I weight aptitude? Because in general, and this is perhaps a little more European because they have more extremes, broadly speaking, breeding stayers to sprinters and vice versa doesn't work terribly well. Now, Galileo's making a fool of us all because he's getting good milers out of sprint mares, but generally that doesn't work. So you've got all these different factors, and it's extremely difficult. You've also got the female line. The female line represents a constant in the pedigree genetically because it's the mitochondrial DNA, and so a mare that has a shared ancestor, you don't see it on the catalogue page, but a mare that has a shared ancestor going back 50 years or 100 years will still generally have the same mitochondrial DNA. Now, the mitochondria from the DNA, that was different many generations ago, and I'm told that it migrated into the nuclear DNA, so it's almost putting the two back together again. So to get the best mitochondrial function, you have to have the right nuclear DNA, which will be represented by the stallions, or represented by the rest of the animals in the pedigree. And so you've got all these factors going on at once. And to be honest, it's getting to the stage where, as a human being, especially an aging one, it's hard to remember and apply all that you think you've learned over that period of time consistently. And so what we're looking now is with getting a TrueNicks 2.0, which would use deep learning, would use artificial intelligence. And Byron's posted about this a little bit. We'd actually turn elements in the pedigree of class, of aptitude, and various other parts of that equation into color bands and tones, because artificial intelligence works better on patterns, visual patterns, than on sort of names or data or numbers. And so it would almost be having, if you can imagine having a sheet of plastic with aptitude in one color and then overlaying that with class, overlaying that with the class, racing class, and then the class of the production, it would be able to weight all those different factors. And in some cases, that factor might be an important one, and in others it may not. So we're looking at something as sophisticated as that now, which I think will be the next step in computing and pedigrees. And the jockey club have become quite enthusiastic, I think, after seeing TrueNicks, about building some tools to have a look at breeding and pedigrees in this way. It would make them a leader in that field.
Yeah, I know. Craig Bernick of Glen Hill Farm down in Florida has started the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation, and one of the points that came across on Twitter for that was to see if the Jockey Club could make their data more freely available. What would your thoughts be on that?
Well, I think that they're aware of, from my contacts with them, that this has been another change too, is that data obviously is very, very valuable in those kind of fields. Now, I mean, there's a couple of parts of it. I guess I understand in some sports that there is a league that makes the data freely available and encourages people to use it. But the other part of it, though, is that I think there's an awareness that you can go to a certain program and get a lot of data fairly inexpensively. There's other things you can subscribe to for $100 or $200 or $250 in a year. where now a lot of this data is available. It gets wicked and things like that. And so I think that the Jockey Club they're on to the next stage of evolution. I think they're probably starting to understand that the value isn't just in having the data, because more and more of that data is becoming accessible in other ways. It's the value is an intelligent use of that data and packaging it in a marketable way.
Right. Not only for the breeders, but for the bettors as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to change gears a little bit here and just get your thoughts on something that I noticed on the Belmont Stakes Day card. Deputy Minister kept showing up over and over and over again. Can you tell us more about his influence even today?
Yeah, I mean, he was he was by a vice regent who was an interesting horse in his own right. He was one of the first crops of Northern Dancer vice regent, and vice regent's brother was a horse called Vice Regal, who had been a sensation. I think Vice Regal was in Northern Dancer's first crop, and Vice Regal was a sensational 2-year-old. Vice Regent had any number of injuries. He won a couple of races impressively, got hurt, fell in a ditch at one point, and went to stud very, very cheaply at E.P. Taylor just because he was Vice Regal's brother. And of course, he ended up being champion sire in Canada. I can't remember. It was more than probably a dozen times. And Deputy Minister was his best son, who was out of a relatively inexpensive mare. But one of the interesting things is, if you're into the mitochondrial families, he went back to a mare called Queen Mary of what's called the number 10 family in Bruce Lowe numbers, and was intensely inbred to that line. It's the same family's exclusive native. But Deputy Minister was a brilliant 2-year-old and trained on to be an effective older horse, if not dominant. He was Horse of the Year in Canada too, and champion 2-year-old in America. But yeah, I mean, he was a very, very good stallion. The sire line has thinned out a little bit, in as much as we're probably most dependent on Awesome Again and Ghost Zapper coming up with a stallion son. But he's been a phenomenally good broodmare sire too. And he's, of course, Abel Tasman was one of the ones that was our mating that won on the Belmont card too. Yeah,
I noticed that it's mostly through the matings that I saw were mostly through daughters of Deputy Minister.
Yeah, he's of course he's broodmare sire of Abel Tasman. Then he sired the second dam of Arrogate, so he's going to be around in pedigrees. And Curlin, for example, is out of the Deputy Minister mare and is doing tremendously well when he gets Deputy Minister inbreeding.
Great. And so speaking of inbreeding, I know this is a controversial topic among American breeders. I've talked to some people who only like very distant inbreeding. I've talked to people who like very intense inbreeding. And those who are against it fear that it's, jeopardizing the safety of the horse. What are your thoughts on intense inbreeding? I personally look at the pedigrees of horses like Ultimus, who is 2-2 to Domino. You get Beaming Beauty and Bubbling Over.
With Hippodrome.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, actually, the Ultimus thing went one step further, because Ultimus had a son called High Time, who was also out of a Domino mare.
Right.
Now, High Time was he was kind of an illustration of the negatives and the positives of very close inbreeding. In as much as he was brilliantly fast, but he was also a bleeder and a roarer. Despite that, he was champion sire. He got a horse called Saracen. And Saracen's full sister is the ancestress of Miesque, who is in turn the ancestress of this year's French Derby winner, Study of Man. But very close inbreeding there's no doubt it carries risk. What you tend to get with close inbreeding, when you see it in small patriarchal societies too, whether they do records with humans, but inbreeding will tend to bring out or expose recessive negatives. So if you have a negative aspect, in the horse, it's not visible in the stallion or the mare, but you put the two together and then the negative recessive is expressed. Now, having said that, you can look at pedigrees and you can see great horses. Anything, there was a mare called Coronation V,